So in terms of the day of the cycle, it very again for the frozen cycle, it very much depends on the age of the stage of the embryos frozen. So if the embryo was frozen on day 2 or day 3, then obviously that should be taken into consideration, and will be the embryo transfer will be transferred on a different time comparing to an embryo who's been frozen on day 5. Normally, we would give some progesterone to match the age of the embryo. So just to make things a little bit clear, if you are on a medicated cycle, then and your lining is fine, is ready, is over 7 or 8 millimeters, then we would, and you have a day 5 embryo, then we would start the progesterone, and then after 6 days of progesterone we would transfer the embryo, because that is the time where, if you were to conceive naturally, you would have had already 6 days of exposure to progesterone, and also is the time where in natural conception the embryo actually travels from the fallopian tube inside the uterus. So it's very, very similar to natural conception of what we do when we transfer a blastocyst, when we transfer a day 5 blastocyst. That's why probably is one of the reasons why blastocyst transfers is very successful. If your embryo is a little bit behind, so at day 2 or day 3, then again we will give 3 or 4 days of progesterone before transferring the embryo. So the idea is that the lining, the uterine cavity should be timed and synchronized with the age of your embryo. So that's the idea behind. About the indication for frozen transfer, of course, it depends. Some patients had frozen embryos because, for example, during the fresh cycle, they have experienced ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And that is one of the main reasons to freeze embryos, actually, because by delaying the pregnancy, we reduce almost to zero the chances of being ill and sick. So that is one of the indications. Another indication is if, for example, during the first cycle, we discover polyps, which can actually grow during the stimulation, and the polyps can affect implantation. So again, in this case, it's a good advice to freeze, get rid of the polyp, and then transfer the embryo when the uterine cavity is healthy again. Another reason could be, another gynecological problems like hydrosalpingosis, which is when the tubes are swollen, and sometimes these tubes become swollen during the stimulation. Again, freezing is recommended. There's been also quite a trend in the last few years of actually freezing anyway, just freeze, because there's been some belief that, by transferring the embryo in a frozen cycle, you have a little bit more control of the preparation of the endometrium, of the environment, and there could be a better timing for that, and that might increase the chances of becoming pregnant. But there's been a large study done, a multinational study showing that there is no difference really, at least for the general population. Some categories of patients obviously will benefit still from the freezing, but the general population won't benefit. So indication for frozen embryo transfers are mainly the reasons why the embryos were frozen to start with, and I think I went through the main reasons.